Good morning. Good morning. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for spring, which reminds us of newness, of possibility, of hope. Thank you that no flower that we see blooming is ever the same year after year. Be with us as we continue to think and rethink liturgical space, as we continue to figure out how we might best honor you in space and in time. Guide our minds with creativity, guide our hearts with courage, and our lips with truth. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, so those of you who have been here all the way along have a small head start, but those who have not are not too far behind. So if you have been here, we have been working on a drawing of our ideal liturgical space, and your paper, along with everybody else's, is on the back table. If you have not been here before, no worries at all. Take one of these sheets and one of the pens that's in front of you and just follow the instructions, and in 5 minutes you will be caught up. This is no problem whatsoever. If you haven't taken a look at the back table, we have quite a bit of diversity among us. So anytime that you are tempted to say, well, everybody thinks, I'm the guy whose office you come and sit in, so I'm going to tell you right now that's not so. And when we have a difference of opinion and view in the Christian community, we get together and we chat. And here on this piece of paper is an advertisement about some opportunities to chat. Our goal in this class was to raise our liturgical vocabulary a little bit, to explore liturgical theology, to talk about how it is that God and history and sacrament are reflected in our spaces. The meetings on this card are going to take us into our own space and let us practice with our vocabulary and with our concepts. And you'll notice the very first one of these opportunities is today, this very day. So you can go right from the class to worship in the church. Pay attention to God when you're in worship, not to the space, and then stay after and we can talk about the space. We also have another one coming up tomorrow for those whose time is more flexible during the day rather than in the evening. And then we have a Wednesday evening and a Sunday evening coming up, and our hope is that that'll accommodate everybody so you can come to at least one of these sessions to talk about the nave. And the nave design committee members, whose names are listed at the bottom, will all be there. Representatives will be there at the sessions, and they're also glad to hear from you. But wait, there's more. There's more. An opportunity to give feedback on the master plan, which is all the way around the room here. Copies are available in the parish office. I also sent them out by email. The committee that's working on this would like to hear from you by email, if possible, with your feedback on the master plan, any ideas you have, things that you want to make sure we don't miss, haven't thought about yet. And if email is not your cup of tea, just give a call into the office and we'll take down the notes. So feedback by email or in writing for the master plan, feedback in one of these sessions for the nave. Clear as mud? Excellent, excellent. All right, so where have we been? Where have we been? I have 13 pages of notes for this class. Not all for today, but that's where we've been. Let's see. Session 3, here we are. The first thing I did was introduce some principles of liturgical design. So those of you who have been here with us for the course know that we haven't been just saying, well, this is a flying buttress, and this is a gargoyle, and this is where they came from, and this is what they do. We've gone back to basics and asked questions about our theology. And one of the principles that I gave us is that in the New Testament, there is no occurrence in which the word church is used to describe a building. Instead, the word church is used to describe a people gathered together to be nourished by and to give glory to God. So instead of using the term church to refer to the pointy-shaped roofed building, I've been using for this class the word oikos, which has nothing to do with yogurt, but it is the Greek word for household. and is used in the New Testament both to refer to people and to buildings. So you might say that your home is your household, but you might also say that your family is your household. That word works the same in Greek, and I think is a better word for us to be using than church. So we are talking about the household of God. It's also the case that the early church was a lot more interested in security than it was in architecture. So for the first 3 or 4 centuries of our existence, the Christian faith was illegal, and Christians would worship in places not unlike Anne Frank's attic, all the way in the back with the curtains pulled with a single candle to read the word, knowing that the authorities could beat down the door at any minute and take them all into custody for their faith. People who live under such conditions, which are the conditions under which the biblical writers all lived, are not as concerned with how we lay out the floor plan of the church as we might be today. So it is the case that we have not always done it that way before. Our earliest ancestors knew nothing of the traditions that we have so rarefied, of the designs of church buildings that we have so rarefied. The cruciform shape, which I argue mainly every church design answers to, was developed in the Middle Ages as the authority of the church increased in Europe. And so it was the church that was giving authority to the state. Still the case in many countries. On a very, very sad day, many years from now, when Her Majesty the Queen dies, it will be the Archbishop of Canterbury who puts the crown on the head of the new king. It is the church, starting in the Middle Ages, that gave authority to the monarch. And so buildings were constructed that represented the authority and the significance of the church. Enter now the cruciform shape. This is the floor plan for Washington National Cathedral. It could just as well be the floor plan of Notre Dame in Paris. It could almost be the floor plan of St. John the Divine in New York, but we haven't finished it yet. We're going to work on it over the next century or so. And there's some main areas of the cathedral. What's this area where the people sit? The nave, thank you very much. Up at the front of the nave, the intersection of the cross aisle and the main aisle is the crossing, a creative name there. On the sides, we have 2 areas here that are called the transepts, thank you. Then this area here, choir, where the benches face in towards each other so that the choir can sing across to one another. And then up at front, we have this area where the sacramental acts take place, and that is called the... Starts with a CH. Chancel, thank you very much. Chancel. And then around it, we have the place where you would perambulate, and that is the ambulatory. And you will see here that this design forms a cross. So their architecture reflected their theology. It made a statement about what they were doing in that place. If you take the floor plan off, you can see the layout of most of the churches that you would know. This shape would fit exactly on top of St. Mary's Cathedral downtown. If you took off the green arms, this shape would fit generally Holy Communion. This whole idea of front-facing pews with an area separated up at front is all an answer to the Middle Ages. And it is the case that we have not always done it that way before. Wow. Other traditions have evolved as well. Somebody said to me this week who hadn't been able to come to our class, well, I hope that you're going to point out that the pulpit at Holy Communion is on the wrong side. And I said, well, it's on the wrong side if you hold that it has to be on the gospel side, which you hold is on the left-hand side when you're looking at the table. But all of that is probably 800 to 1,000 years old at most. And so we have at least half as long of Christianity where that wasn't a worry as we have where that was a worry. And as we start talking about our own space, what I'd really rather us be talking about is what we want it to be for our mission and ministry today. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, rather than answering to cruciform shape and design from the late Middle Ages. So, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? A question. Who drives? Architecture or theology? Architecture or theology? Let me ask that question in a slightly different way, or let me give you a little bit of information. For those of you who've taken my Inquirers class, you'll remember that I give you a phrase when we're talking about liturgy, lex credendi, lex orandi, lex credendi. Lex orandi, lex credendi. Can anybody do the translation for me? 4 years ago you could. The law of prayer, lex orandi, is the law of belief, lex credendi. Put another way, praying shapes believing, as one of the liturgical reformers of the mid-20th century put it. Praying shapes believing. And we might contend that our beliefs lead our prayers. So I have this understanding of God, therefore I'm going to pray in this certain way to God, right? This idea, lex orandi, lex credendi, which is from the Reformation, or praying shapes believing, which is from the 20th century, suggests it's actually the other way around. And that when you discipline yourself to a cycle of prayer, you are influencing the way that you believe. When you let those prayers and those collects and the Eucharist weave its way into your soul, it will shape the way that you understand God and the way that you interact with God. That's one argument to say that design, architecture, would lead belief. On the other side, we look back to our history and we say that the cruciform shape in the Middle Ages was looking back to monasticism, when the monks and the nuns were considered the highest expression of Christianity, and they carried that forward. So we looked at the Chapel of the Good Shepherd in New York City, where you have the choir benches for the members of the seminary community, and then you have a rood screen, sort of a half wall, that separates them from the rest. That works if you're a monastic or a closed community, and the cross pews let you sing across to one another. But it really wouldn't work if we set up the whole church here that way, would it? Be very different purpose, very different community gathered. So the cruciform shape was trying to bring forward the history of monasticism, and many of our churches today are trying to bring forward the cruciform shape from the Middle Ages. But you know what? Using the cruciform shape did not enhance monasticism. It didn't have people lining up to go and become monks and nuns. And building churches today in a cruciform shape does not inspire us to go back to the day where the church was the arbiter of all things religious and both social and religious. So there's an argument to say we've been trying for centuries to use our architecture to move our theology forward, but it hasn't really worked. So it leaves us at this odd space of, do we insist that our theology lead, or do we insist that our architecture lead? And what I'm going to say to you is neither and both. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Both need to drive and both need to be considered. We don't want a church that in no way connects to what we need it to do for us, and at the same time, we don't want a church that doesn't look like a church. So both need to have priority. I would suggest that a modern church needs to balance three things: word, table, and font. Why the font? The liturgical reform movement of the middle 20th century brought back the idea of baptismal ministry as core. The idea that ministry is not done by the priests for God on behalf of y'all. You are the ministers of the church. You are the ones who go out into the world every day and hopefully behave ethically and respect other people, even when society might not tell you that you have to. You're the ones who are committed to the development of our community, and it's the role of those of us who are the professional Christians. It's our role to encourage you and to train you and to send you out and to pick you up when you fall down. But it's your work to go out and do the work. And baptism is our symbol of that. So what does it say to us if the symbol of baptism in the church is not prominent? Does that match our understanding? Likewise, I told you that you can use as a rule of thumb when you go into a church that the largest and most central object in the room is the most important one. I also argued last week that in the Episcopal Church, whoever is wearing the most clothing is the one who's in charge. And the bishop took that to a whole new level last week. I mean, just over the top. When you walk into Second Presbyterian Church, or Independent Presbyterian Church, or Second Baptist Church, what's the big thing that you see? The pulpit. That's a statement. That's a statement. When you walk into a Roman Catholic church, the big thing that you see is the altar table. In an Episcopal church, you're going to see balance between those. You're going to see a prominent pulpit in a place by itself, and you're going to see a prominent table in a place by itself, because we've got this liturgy that celebrates both word and table equally. And we're now starting to see the introduction of fonts in prominent places as well to represent our baptismal identity. It's not about me, the priest. It's about us, the baptized community of faith. We've been using St. Mary's Cathedral downtown as an example. It's a perfect cruciform-designed church if you want to go pop your head in down there and see what one looks like. And they've moved their baptismal font, just like the National Cathedral has, right into the middle of the people, so that when you enter, you can't miss it. And when you baptize someone, you are surrounded by them on every side. It's a good example for us to be looking at. So I would argue that we need to have a balance there between word and table and font. One last thing there. We are living in a hyper-individualized society. And I would argue to you that the heresy of the modern day is individualism. I can do it myself. I can earn, I can build, I can accomplish, I can do it all myself. And technology is not helping us here. I only need to see those articles from sources that I already have decided that I agree with in advance. I don't need to bump into an article from a publication with which I might disagree. I don't even need to flip past it. That's not a great thing, because it puts us into this box that says, I have already come up with all knowledge, and I only want to be challenged in a way that's going to deepen my knowledge along the track that I have already prescribed for myself. And when you do this for a couple of decades, you start to see what we see in our national government. You start to see what we see in society around us. I don't like this. I don't care what you think. I don't like it. But the church is in a very different place. The church is in a place where we say, we together are the body of Christ. Can the hand say to the foot, I have no need of you? No, it can't. We together are called to follow Christ. We together are called to make decisions. We together are called to discern the will of God. It's a harder road. It's a messier road, but it's ours. And thus it is here, balancing all of these things, with some people saying, well, but for me it's about the proclamation of the word. For me it's about baptism. For me it's about the table. Well, great, and we're all here together, so let's figure out how we balance those things together. But word and table and font are all answers to this individualized idea that we have in our society. You don't get to come to the table alone. I'm not going to meet you here at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning to celebrate communion for you so that you don't need to be here with all these other people. We do it together. And we design spaces that bring us together, such that when you're kneeling at the rail waiting for that wafer to be put into your hand, you look to your left and you look to your right and you see somebody who isn't perfect and whom you may know not to be perfect. And as you're looking at them saying, wow, they're not perfect, you're perhaps reminded, wow, neither am I. And that's what we do here. Last but not least, we offer hospitality, room for the stranger. Hebrews chapter 13, 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. To which angels is the writer of Hebrews responding or referring? Who has entertained angels without knowing it? Abraham, exactly. He's in his tent, And these three strangers come along, and he says, please come into my tent. And he has Sarah go and make dinner, and he lays it before them. And he invites them to take lodging. And in the night they make a promise to him that the covenant that God made will be fulfilled. And in the morning they vanish. He provided hospitality to strangers, and he had angels staying in his house. What about that person who's not yet here? What about that person who gets up the courage to come across the threshold for the first time? We've worked really hard on our Invite, Welcome, Connect ministry, our hospitality ministry, to make sure that we can reach out to that person. If they fill out a visitor's card, we call them back right away. We have a gift bag for them. We have greeters stationed all around the church. We can get you somebody to sit with. We can make sure you're not sitting in somebody else's seat. We can do all of that. We are ready. Why was that the biggest laugh that I've gotten so far? When I was in New York, there was this 90-something-year-old woman who used to come, and she was old New York, and she had a mink coat and a mink hat and all of that, and she would come in, and I would take her by the arm, because I was an usher then, and I would walk her to her seat, and I said to her, oh my goodness, someone's sitting in your seat today. Would you like to sit one row ahead or one row behind? And she looked at me and said, neither, and tapped that person on the shoulder and moved him along. So when we're starting to think about these strangers whom Abraham encountered to be angels, is our building ready to receive them? And does that matter to us? These panels around the room are talking about how the building can receive them, but what about this worship space? If somebody comes in not knowing that they're supposed to come around to the side and come in the back door with all the rest of us, are we ready to receive it? Is the space what we would want it to be to welcome someone in? Are there barriers between them and us? We need to ask those questions, because our faith is one that is all about offering hospitality to the strangers. One of the liturgical theologians that I've been following in developing this class puts it this way: instead of imagining ourselves as a company of intimates and generating a theology or a pattern of liturgical behavior based on that assumption, what would our self-sense be if the stranger were our principal and evocative metaphor? Instead of imagining ourselves as a company of intimates and generating a theology or a pattern of liturgical behavior based on that assumption, what would our self-sense be if the stranger were a principal and evocative metaphor? It would sort of make us the host, if you will, of God's little dinner party, but we would be in good company, because 237 times in Scripture, our God is referred to as the Lord of hosts. And we know something about hosting at Holy Communion. We know something about hosting in the South. I have been hosted more graciously here than anywhere else that I've ever lived in my life. And what I would suggest to you is, when we start thinking about liturgical space, bring all of the instincts that you would have if you were hosting a dinner party in your home to bear on what we're doing at the church. What would it look like to receive someone into your home? How does that compare to how we receive somebody into our church? Let's take that one step further. The light is, the Lord has blessed us with a bright sunny day, and I'm sorry for that because it's drowning out my beautiful pictures and animations, but you know they're great. On the left-hand side is my own dinner table in my own house with a party laid out for 2 or 3 people. And you can see there's salad plates and there are entree plates and forks and knives and all of that. Wine is available, if not yet poured. Maybe similar to something that you have in your house. There's greenery. This was around Christmas time, so there were holly berries on the bush outside, and I cut a few and put them in the middle of the table. Perhaps this is something you would do in your house. And on the right-hand side is another dinner that I prepared. Easter Day in this church, bread and wine poured and available. Guests gathered, almost 1,000 in number, to receive it. What I'm going to ask you is, how are these two images, these two dinner parties, the same, and how are they different? Dinner party in your house, Holy Eucharist at church. How are they the same, and how are they different? This is conversation. Carol. Prepared with attention to detail. I like that. That's one of the ways they're the same. Communion with others. It's not a dinner party if you're just sitting there by yourself. You can set the table, and that's nice, but there's something magic about the guests arriving to share it with you, right? What else? Same or different? David?
The one on the left seems to be much cozier, friendlier, more inviting.
Okay.
The one on the right is somewhat cold and standoffish.
Okay, it's warm, inviting, intimate versus big, a little bit standoffish, a little bit cold. All right? Don?
Structure for the image on the right versus more unstructured for the left.
So that's interesting. What Don has just said is structured on the right for the church image and unstructured on the left. And I'm going to poke at that for a minute because with the Eucharist, certainly we're structured in the sense that we have the words to say, and you have the script, and I have the script, and I say my part, and you say your part, and we have this dance going back and forth. But I would suggest to you that there's just as many rules as when I show up at your house. So I'm going to show up, I'm going to ring the bell, I'm not going to show myself in. One of the two of the hosts is going to come to the door to open that door for me. They're not going to send somebody else, most likely. And if they do, that person's probably going to make a joke about it because it doesn't quite fit. I'm going to bring something to offer to you. Then we're going to go in. We're probably not going to head into the living room where you've set out beautiful, some people call it crudité. I once learned it as crudité, which is sort of what you would do if you were trying to take over a dinner party in a hostile way. You've laid out the crudité in the living room, but where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the kitchen, and I'm going to stand in the kitchen with you, and we're going to talk for a little while, and then you're probably going to point me in the direction of the living room, and then someone's going to clink a glass and say it's time to go into the dining room, probably say, Sandy, would you say grace? At which point I'm going to say, no, I'm sorry, I don't pray in public. I've done that to a few of you. Then we're going to go in, and where am I not going to sit? I will not sit at the head of the table. Exactly. So perhaps in church we've got a written structure, but here in the South we know how to conduct ourselves at a dinner party, and it's going to go step by step in just the same way. How else are they the same or different? Does someone want to make the argument for different? How are they different? Ah, very good. So Glenda's just said, most likely at my dinner table, you're going to know the people well, or at least have some connection. So if a new person has been brought in, there's a reason for it. Whereas in the church, there are definitely going to be people that you don't know well. Jillian?
In the dinner party on the left, you were the host. In the Eucharist, Jesus.
Ah, very good. So in the dinner party on the left, the host is the host. In the dinner party on the right, Jesus is the host. Ken?
On the left, all the preparation is done beforehand. The guest doesn't see it. On the right, everything is prepared as all the guests are there.
That's a wonderful observation. So Ken has just pointed out that in the dinner party on the left, everything is prepared before you get there. And the host and the hostess have a plan for how they're going to do those last bits of preparation, who's going to be with the people so that they don't notice that there's still food being cooked, right? The dinner party on the right is interesting because it's the deacon who's going to prepare the table, it's the priest who's going to consecrate the meal, but it's using the offering that you have brought forward. When you watch the bread and the wine come up at the offertory, that is your bread and wine being received into the sacred mysteries, and you watch it all happen. So it's sort of like we're a family, right? If it was a family dinner party, you wouldn't mind as much everybody hanging out in the kitchen, and you'd probably say, here's a knife and a cutting board, slice those radishes for me, right? Not so much if it was outside folks that you were inviting in. Daniel. Yes, freewheeling conversation on the right, more structured on the left. Dottie, last comment. On the right, you have a book from which to read, so the script is rigid. Okay? One of the things I was expecting you to say, and perhaps you have just psyched me out in not saying it because you knew I was going to jump on it when you did. I was expecting somebody to say, the right-hand meal is sacred, and the left-hand meal is more ordinary. This is the South? Both are sacred. Well, I'm going to argue. I've been below the Mason-Dixon for 10 years, and I'm still learning my way around down here. What I'm going to argue to you is that it's not just in the South that both are sacred. One thing I learned early in my ministry, many of you know, I often work through lunch. If there's been times when I need to connect with one of you, I'll say, let's go to lunch. You got to eat, tuck it in. I'll work through lunch. I'll eat at my desk. I'll push through, get takeout, whatever it is. I don't do those things with dinner. Dinner, I want to stop. And I want to enjoy the food that the good earth has given. And I want to enjoy the company of whomever it is that I have the privilege of sharing that time with. I don't want to rush. I don't ever schedule dinners that have a firm hard stop on the end of them, whereas I do that with lunch all the time. I want for dinner to be, and I use this word advisedly, sacramental. Because I think it is holy when God's people come together and share a meal that the good earth has grown and engage with one another and be in a safe and contained environment together and share life's experience. Somebody once challenged me to define with this question: how is dinner in a restaurant or dinner in somebody's home different from the Eucharist? And it was one of those questions that just changed my life because I'd never thought about it. I initially rejected it, and then I realized he was right. And that stuck with me for all these years. So as we think about this, let's not forget the rules that we would use if we were hosting in our home. And then last but not least, this question of strangers. Archbishop William Temple was Archbishop of Canterbury. Thane, I'm calling on you in just 1 second. Was Archbishop of Canterbury during the Second World War and gives us this offering. The church is the only society that exists principally for the benefit of those who are not, parens, yet, close parens, its members. I learned it as not yet its members, which has a very mission-oriented feel to it. Thane Muller has corrected me to say it's actually just who are not its members. And much to my chagrin, as I've looked for citations, the plurality of them are on Thane's side. So I've bracketed it the way that I remember it. But think about that. Our principal purpose is to serve those who are not or who are not yet our members. It's not about us. It's not about building a clubhouse for us. It's about talking about how we serve the community around us, how we bring people in, how this society changes us and through us the world. Different mentality than when you might be designing your home, even though that idea of hospitality needs to be there. 3 words. And I went to the dictionary to get these words: acculturation, assimilation, amalgamation. All of them talking about how 2 different groups of people encounter each other and join together. Acculturation, this is Merriam-Webster here, is often tied to political conquest or expansion. It is applied to the process of change in beliefs or traditional practices that occur when the cultural system of one group displaces the cultural system of another group. So A plus B in acculturation equals A times 2. B's culture disappears, and we do the same thing bigger. Assimilation, a process through which individuals and groups of differing heritages acquire the basic habits, attitudes, and mode of life of a single embracing culture. A plus B equals A and B next to each other. Amalgamation is when a blending of cultures rather than one group eliminating the other or two groups mixing together. A plus B equals C, something new and different. How does this apply to church growth? In the first, we say, all right, we want to grow, and we're going to design a church building that is very inviting for people to come in, and we're going to have hospitality ministers, and we're going to have good explanations in the leaflets so that everybody knows what we're doing and how to do it. And when they come in, we will teach them how to be us. We will teach them how we do things, and we will be bigger, the same we are now, but bigger. That's the first. That's acculturation. An example of assimilation would be, all right, we are going to keep 8 o'clock and 10:30 the same, and then at 5:30, as you all did about 15 years ago, we're going to introduce a service that's very, very different. And we're going to bring in some people whose culture is very different from ours, and the morning congregation will have a certain culture and feel to it, and the evening congregation will have a certain culture and feel to it, and that's great. We're bigger, nobody loses anything, and these cultures can exist side by side. That's assimilation. Amalgamation would be to say, wow, somebody new has come in the door. I wonder how we're going to be different as a result of having that person here. None of these are easy, by the way, and they're not easy for a very specific reason. The first one is violent because it involves sort of taking over somebody's culture. We are the dominant culture. This culture will continue. The second one is hard. How is it that we can have two groups in one space forming one parish family? And the third one's just darn scary. Because the church is supposed to be our anchor place, right? The place that we come back to, that place that doesn't change. But when we bring new folks in, if we change, then things are going to be different. Change is, change. Things are different. None of them are easy. But when we start thinking about liturgical space, this is relevant. Do we create a space that just simply perpetuates this culture? Or do we create a space that has room for us to change as we grow, that has room for different expressions at different times of the week or the day? How do we do that? You see the relevance there? Why that's significant? Two examples, and they're a little washed out, and I'm sorry for that. This is from the case studies that we worked on last week. The left-hand image is the Chapel of the Good Shepherd at General Theological Seminary in New York. A decent seminary. Didn't train the 3 full-time priests at this church, but it's all right. Sorry, Jillian, I apologize. Kind of. So General Seminary on the left, you've got prominent altar and prominent pulpit. You've got choir benches for the members of the community. You've got a rood screen, and then outside of the rood screen, you've got standard pews facing forward. The community sits inside, the visitors sit outside, right? Then I showed you St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church in San Francisco, where they have 2 different rooms. A room where you go for the liturgy of the word, and you sit choir style facing each other, and someone will sit on a teacher's chair at the front and preach the word. And then when it comes time for the peace, they do what? Dance. They dance into the other room. Don't worry, I'm not going that far. These are extremes. These are extremes, not examples. So talk to me about those 2 examples of hospitality. I don't want to say that General Seminary is not hospitable, because that church was designed for a specific purpose. It was designed to integrate a community. And when people come into that community of students, they are wrapped in by those who have been there longer than they. It's a different expression of hospitality to a different people. The closing in of the rood screen says we are here together, and this is our community, and others visit us from time to time. And that's okay there. Gregory of Nyssa says we're going to make everybody uncomfortable. Everybody. The people who've been here forever. I will never be comfortable two-stepping from one room to the next in the middle of the service. That's not something that's going to be comfortable for me ever. So they say hospitality is making everybody uncomfortable and sticking together and moving together. So what do you think? Talk to me about these extremes. Have I made you think about anything new? Have you had any insights on this? Steve, please. Hmm. What Steve just offered is that in his experience of folks who are diagnosed with cancer, when they start to lose their hair, oftentimes many of their friends will also shave their heads. And everybody's uncomfortable to start, but then they arrive at a new normal place. Did I see another hand? Jean, did you have a hand? Uh-huh. Wonderful. This is a great observation. So Jean just pointed out that the right-hand image has the feel of a coffee bar. And in fact, this right-hand image is the setup of St. Gregory of Nyssa when they've brought out the coffee after church. So literally, there is a coffee bar in the middle of this space. It's a folding table, not a permanent installation. But Jean says, church should be more sacred than that. And I'm going to play with the word sacred, but what I'd like to suggest, and correct me if I'm going too far, Jean, is some otherness. There should be this remembrance that God is bigger than, and that we are entering into this presence where there's going to be some space and there's going to be some rigidity, because it's not all about us, and it's not about sitting around the table like we might at Starbucks and reading the newspaper. Is that a fair expansion of your view? Mm-hmm. So it is different, so it should feel different as well. I had a hand in the back, then I'll come up to the front. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we want some balance between this otherness, this sacredness. This is different from all the other places we go, but we also want to have that warmth and that welcome to it. I'll tell you, when I was growing up as a clergy kid, nobody was the least bit interested into whether I was comfortable. I was to sit up in the front pew and have my hands folded and say my amens, and that was the end of it. This is a new conversation. David, then Pat. David first, and then Pat, and then you. Mm-hmm.
Is the word we're looking for sanctuary?
Sanctuary, is that the word? Mm-hmm.
Sanctuary from all the stuff that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Place that we can count on.
We've got the Starbucks thing everywhere. Literally in Starbucks, and the library is borrowing their furniture, and all these things. We've got that everywhere else. Do we need it here, or is this our refuge, our sanctuary from that? Pat?
I was just thinking that you don't want to go too far in making it.
Right. So Pat's just offered that the fourth commandment tells us to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And one of the things that we do to honor the Sabbath is come to worship here. And we want that to be different. That's what Sabbath is. It's the break from the norm to honor God in this space. We don't want to go back to box pews with your family plaque on them, but at the same time, we don't want to go to coffee standing around the middle either. Sunny?
I don't know if you wanted to send a message to us that the left is empty, the right is full of people.
Um, that's a very good observation. Uh, Sonny has pointed out that the left-hand image doesn't have any people in it, and I would say that is not the point that I was making, and that was probably taken in the middle of the day, and if you'd taken a picture at St. Gregory's in the middle of the afternoon, it too would have been empty of people. So good observation, but we're going to set that one aside. Hester, please. So what Hester has just offered is that Sandy would be very comfortable in the church on the left, and Hester would be very comfortable in the church on the right. But we want both of us to stay. So how do we do that in a way that honors both? The church on the left, when you want to feel God as otherly, when you want to feel small and let God feel big, when you want to be like Genesis 1, where God is speaking over the void and his word causes things to happen, you want a church like the left-hand one. And when you want to feel intimately connected on this journey, walking and talking with people, the God of Genesis 2, the space on the right, makes more sense for that. One last comment. Daniel.
Those who know me know I have a bit of a challenge with the word balance.
Daniel doesn't like balance.
It suggests almost a goal for perfection. You can get it just absolutely level. I prefer tension.
Mm.
And I think tension is the thing that goes back and forth. And I think that's kind of where we are in this whole discussion. All of us are going to feel certain things. And if we feel like we have to work to get it absolutely balanced, that feels kind of discouraging to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But to have the tensions fully expressed and put together, that's kind of more appealing.
Mm-hmm. Tension rather than balance. We have these different ideas. They're jockeying for position within our hearts and within our minds, and we're not going to balance them such that we quell the waters. We're going to hold them in tension such that the waters continue to challenge us, keep us stirred up. So here's my concluding point. This is an issue of strategy, not formulary. There is not a right answer to these questions. There is not a right answer for how a church should be designed. There is a best answer for how each church should be designed. And that best is going to come from the community that is going to worship there and that's going to be at home there. In some places, that's going to be like those churches that we saw, the colonial churches in Virginia and in Philadelphia, where you have a big pulpit that celebrates the Word and a little tiny table that somebody shoved in the way to celebrate communion on because they realized they'd forgotten to put that in. That's going to be the way in some places. In some places, it's going to be all about communion. Big old table, little podium on the side for the priest to say a few words, but a very few words, and move on. In some places, it's going to be centered around baptism. In some places, we're going to have tension between the three. Different congregations are going to resolve it differently. And the reason that I used all of the examples I used last time and the two that I brought back this time are active congregations within the Episcopal Church in the United States. So these are not textbook examples. These are examples of congregations like us who have said, this is what our church home needs to be in this place. There is no right answer for all. There is a best answer for each. Without getting into the particulars of our space, so after church today, we're going to have a chance to go into those particulars, but staying up here at the eagle eye level, when we think of our space at Holy Communion, what do we want it to do? What do we want it to do? Again, please don't go into I think we should do this with the docile curtain, or I think we should do that with the altar rail. What goals do we want our space to accomplish at Holy Communion? Connie. So for you, faith is very joy-based, resurrection-based, and we want a space that's going to keep reminding us of that and bringing us back to it. No ordinary time here, all joy-filled time. Great. A space that's awake and alive. What else? What do we want our space to do or to be? Bill. So Bill has just said we need to keep hospitality at the front of our mind, but do something that's going to bring word and table and font closer to us. Take away some of the separations so that we can be connected to all three. Bradley, did I see your hand? No? Would you like to anyway? The gentlelady does not rise, as they say. I saw another hand somewhere in this region. Maybe not. What else? What do we want the space to do and to be for us? Steve. So what Sarah's offering is that we have these engagements here, we have progressive thinking, we have people who disagree with one another, and we might tussle with an idea, and that doesn't always carry over in the same way into the church room. Mm-hmm. Richness and texture, thank you. Yes, please. You're the one that Bishop Temple was talking about. The one who hasn't been here very long. You're the one we're here for. Mm-hmm. So space for kids not only to interact with each other, but across generations. I'll tell you that all of the research in our field right now is saying that it's those kind of interactions that promote long-term faith. And so it's something we're trying to do also. But that's a really great observation. Thank you for it. Others, what do we want our church to be and to do? Ken, please.
I think one thing we need to remember is we have more than one space
Mm-hmm.
here, and we have all the various aspects of our mission.
Mm-hmm. So you would suggest, if I'm hearing you correctly, that it's okay to design the worship space for worship because we've got all these other spaces that are flexible and that can accommodate fellowship and can accommodate teaching and learning and all of that. Is that fair? Excellent. Martha? Mm-hmm. So Martha has been a member of this church for a very long time and has held up one of the really classic elements of Anglicanism, which is awe, that we need to be awe-inspired when we come into our churches. It needs to be something different from what we encounter anywhere else, something apart from, not cold and separated, but different. Is that fair? Anyone want last word, last comment? Nat, please. So what Nat was doing was going back to those definitions of assimilation, amalgamation, and acculturation, and I'm not going to be able to rattle them accurately right now because those distinctions are good. But what Nat's offering is we're actually asking people to do a little bit of all of them. So when you come in here, you know, we are a church with bishops. That's what Episcopal means. We are a church that baptizes infants. We are a church that does certain things, and really, if you're going to be a part of this community, you need to do those things too. But in other ways, we're willing to change and to grow into something new. And in other ways, we're going to be two cultures side by side. The 5:30 service is a great example of that. Two cultures side by side. One congregation, two very different expressions of worship, two very different norms for engaging with one another. But then on a certain level, Nat, it's going to be assimilation, that if you want to be confirmed and you're part of the 5:30 congregation, you're going to need to do that with a bishop. That's part of the rules. So it's really balancing or holding in tension those three. We want a little bit of all of them and not to run too far in any one direction. Is that fair? Alice? Beautiful and majestic, picking up on the awe theme. Sherry, last word to you, and then we're going to go to church, which will be great.
And this is a totally different way to look at it, and that if we're looking at strategy, I guess in any big project where we're starting something like this, there's something that needs to be made so that when we have the awe that we're talking about, we can get rid of the ugh.
Indeed. What better way to end than that? When we have the awe that we're talking about, we can also get rid of the ugh that we deal with all the time. You know, I'd argued that we need to think about this like we think about our homes, and doesn't every homeowner have the list? Okay, well, if I've got the electrician coming over to fix the plug that's broken, while he's here, I'm going to have him fix the 2 switches that I know how to just nuance them just exactly right to get those lights to turn on. We have some of that too. But we've been also invited to dream a little bit bigger, particularly as we're doing all these other spaces that will talk about hospitality and formation education. So this sort of concludes our thinking, and I hope that I've challenged you to think in some ways that you hadn't before. I hope that your drawing that you did on the first day has all kinds of X's and scribbles in it where you've said, no, I don't want that, or I'd think that, or I'd move that over here. If you'd like to leave them for me, you're welcome. Just leave them on the back table. If you'd like to keep them for yourself, you're welcome to do that too. But here's what I want. We have 4 listening sessions scheduled, and everybody in this room is better prepared than you were 3 weeks ago to engage with those listening sessions. And I'd like for you please to participate, because this is how we're raising the discourse level. We're going to show you the pictures, and we can talk about floor plans and walls and paint colors and all of that. But what we really need to do is say, this is the theological statement that we want to make with our space. We have one of the finest designers in the Episcopal Church working with us. He's done National Cathedral. He's done Trinity Wall Street. He's done the new chapel at Virginia Seminary. His provenance is without doubt. But we want to engage with him and say, this is what we want for our space. The first one is after church today, if you can stay. The next one is at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, if you have flexibility during the day. We have an evening one next Sunday and an evening one next Wednesday. So please do come. Please tell your friends. The more feedback we get, the better off we're going to be. And the same goes for the master plan, where they're asking for feedback by email, and there's correspondence in your email box about that. I love you all very much. Church starts in 10 minutes, so let us move with haste. Thank you.